Happy Tuesday and welcome into Bama News. I'm Simone Eli alongside Patrick Greenfield, already headed into week 7 of the college football season. But before we move forward, we're going to go back and take a quick look at that Alabama loss at Texas A&M. What exactly went wrong Saturday? We're going to break that down, talk about some players talking to the media this week, best and worst case moving forward, and a look ahead to Mississippi State for week 7. But the final from Texas A&M, 41-38 in College Station. Patrick, I feel like I'm still kind of catching my breath after this one, man.
Yeah, that was exhilarating, and I'm pretty sure I was up till about 1 a.m. doing work after that one. But, Saban said it was a trap game, became that for many, many different reasons. But obviously we're going to go into that right now.
Yeah, well, neither one of us were actually there. Let's bring in a guy who was there, Mike Rodak, who got to see everything firsthand. Mike, I know you've been talking about this game literally since it ended, so I'm going to ask you again to talk about it just really briefly. I know Bama fans don't want to hear too much about this. They're ready to turn the page. Obviously, Bama has to turn the page to Mississippi State. But what, in your opinion, went wrong? If you have to name what the biggest thing went wrong in College Station Saturday?
Zach Calzada. I think that was the linchpin when you go into that game and you look at, and we talked about it last week, Texas A&M has the great defense. They have the skill position guys who have done things against Alabama in the past, and Jalen Weidermeyer and Aniyah Smith, and then Devon Achane did some things, but it was always about the quarterback. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't win. That's what I said last week, and it seemed like they didn't have a quarterback because Haynes King was hurt. Calzada hadn't played well. He was throwing, 54% of his passes going into this game. And then all of a sudden, he turns into Joe Burrow against Alabama, and that was kind of the missing piece. Like, that completed the circuit. That made Texas A&M a really, really hard team to beat. And that was kind of the difference, I think, in the game, where Calzada just kept making the throws, even late in the game when the pressure was on and Alabama had come back. Like, he still made that throw down the left sideline, and then just he kept going. And he may never have a game like this again. This may be his high water mark in college football or in football in general. But he played his mind out, and that's what it takes to beat Alabama.
No question, Patrick. When you look at these numbers you have pulled up for us, Zach Calzada, 21 of 31. I think he completed his first dozen passes, 2 for touchdown early on. And the guy, you could just tell, he brought, not only did he bring his A game, but he executed even after getting banged up late in the game, comes back out, leads the game's tying drive, game winning drive. It's just, this guy was looked like a Heisman front runner, for goodness sake.
I think his numbers speak for themselves, but really it's about pressure. And it was about Texas A&M defensive line getting a ton of pressure on Bryce Young, being able to break down the Crimson Tide offensive line. And on the other side, Alabama got 0 sacks compared to Texas A&M. So a lot of that was just having that time in the pocket. Also, I don't think Bryce Young's receivers are doing him giving him a ton of help. Jamison obviously kind of turned it on in the second half, but my question is where is Mechie, and why is the game plan so one-dimensional? I have one stat I kind of wanted to bring up. It's Brian Robinson, and you could see his usage rate over the last 2 games. Obviously, one was a win, but you don't have Jason there anymore. It became a game plan that once they got behind by 2 touchdowns, they didn't know what to do, and it seemed pretty obvious that they were struggling. So
yeah, obviously frustrations. We can see in our comments here, Bama fans still kind of fuming over this loss. And there was a lot of frustrating situations. I want to ask you a little bit, Mike, about play calling. And I know that Saban addressed this a little bit this week. There was some concerns when it came to that 1st and goal situation. How much was that a role in things going wrong or things not going well at times for Alabama? Obviously, they were dominated in the trenches a lot throughout this game, but there was some concerns about play calling.
Yeah, personally, I always think that's a little bit of an overrated aspect that tends to come up after games like these. And I know the red zone was kind of where people focused on, and I was a little bit surprised when Nick Saban came out yesterday. And as close as I think you'll come to Nick Saban criticizing coordinator was yesterday when he said he didn't have an answer to why they ran or why they threw the ball 3 times in a row in the red zone on that drive. And, why, essentially he questioned the play calling. Let's put it that way without exactly explicitly saying that.
Sure.
So that was a little bit surprising to me, in part because Alabama's been really good throwing the ball in the red zone. Like, people kind of forget about that, but they lead the country in passing touchdowns in the red zone with 13.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the game, the go-ahead touchdown late in the game was to Jameson Williams on, you can call it a creative play. I know there maybe should have been a penalty on it, but it was a pass in the red zone that scored the game-winning touchdown. In fact, Roydell Williams had a 20-yard touchdown early in the game that technically counts as a red zone score too. So they're good at it. And I think part of it was their offensive line is not what it was last year. Mm-hmm. And, there's some guys in there, especially on the right side, that they probably didn't trust as well against Texas A&M's defensive line, that Nick Saban came into the game talking about it being an NFL line. And when you line up, in the trenches like that, you got to win those battles. So maybe there was a lack of trust there, but to me, it seemed a little bit overblown. I don't know if that was the difference in the game. If Bryce Young gets to throw the interception in the red zone, maybe, or Cameron Latu doesn't drop a touchdown in the end zone, maybe we're talking about a different result here.
Yeah, and Patrick, you brought that up a second ago. Drop balls, and Mike Hearing right here says it too. Wide open guys, and Saban brought it up as well. Bryce Young and his receiving core, you have to think about, okay, they're 6 games into the season, maybe still working on some timing situations or whatever. But if the ball is going to hit you in the hands, the expectation is to catch it. It seemed like Saban had some frustration about that in the post game as well.
Yeah, I would say it gets a little snafu because you're talking about how great they are in the red zone. He had to get the tying touchdown plus the 2-point conversion. I think it really kind of goes back to they got behind and they didn't know exactly what to do. And you really could go to that last drive where they got the ball with 3 minutes left and they had their whole arsenal in front of them and it lasted 52 seconds. Texas A&M never should have gotten the ball back right there, whether you throw it or run it, because Brian Robinson's obviously your bell cow. You should never have let Texas A&M get the ball back with more than 2 minutes. I don't know how you let that happen. I don't understand. If you look at the drive chart, that Alabama could not go over a minute on that last play. Yeah, on that last series.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I was going to say, I think part of that is like the last couple of years, let's say the last 3 years, in those sort of situations, you could just put the ball in Devontae Smith's hands or put the ball in Waddle's hands, put the ball in Ruggs' hands, and just let them do what they do. And they were that much better than the guy lining up across from them. This year, you don't have that. And maybe you have it in Jameson Williams. I don't know if it's as consistent, where you can just throw him a screen pass and it's an automatic 15, 20-yard gain, or throw a slant over the middle off an RPO, which is what they lived off of with Tua his last year. Mechie, going back to that, I think it's especially true with him, where you just can't toss the ball out to him and expect there to be a big gain and expect him to beat his defender. And that's, I would say, disappointing for him in this stage of his career. And I know Nick Saban said Monday that he's still coming off an injury, that kind of sidelined him in the offseason. Maybe that plays a role, but he just may not be that sort of player who's able to make guys miss in a phone booth and be a difference maker like that. And then you kind of have to turn your attention. Okay, do they have another one on their roster? They have 7 first or second year receivers. They have JoJo Earl, who Saban came out really firing about, during August, saying that this guy's special and has some Waddle-like abilities and had that big game against Mercer. He has 1 catch in 3 out of the 4 games since, and no catch in the other game. So he's not really a big part of this offense, and nobody else out of those first and second year guys are either. So if you're not going to get the difference-making ability out of John Mechie, you're not getting it out of Slade Bolden, you got to find somebody else. And I think right now they're just kind of stuck in the middle of still playing Mechie, still playing Bolden a whole lot, and not really having the opportunity to look at some of these other guys.
And real fast, I was going to say, real fast, you can go down the list. Latu, 1 reception. Trayshawn Holden, 1 reception, 2 yards. Slade Bolden, 2 receptions. You got to get these guys more. Brian Robinson had 4 receptions, and he had 1 in each of the previous 4 games, I believe. I think he had 0 and 1. So if you don't have anybody else to catch the ball other than your X and sometimes your Y and Mechie, you're not going to have a lot of help downfield.
The last thing I'll say before we move forward from this topic is, with 3 minutes left in the game, when Texas A&M ties the game is lost. Texas A&M won the game at that point. The momentum is with the Aggies in front of 106,000 strong. it did not shock me at all that Bama went 3 and out on that drive. That Bama did absolutely nothing and punted away. At that point, the game is lost. I mean, I'm just saying, the momentum is completely shifted. I mean, you're not playing 11 on 11. Like, you're playing 11 on a 106,000 plus some. I mean, like, at that point, like, I'm not saying like you just like lay down and it's over, but it's in your brain. You've allowed this team to hang with you for 3 and almost 4 quarters at this rate. Like, you've lost this game. Texas A&M absolutely won. It wasn't a matter of Bama losing the game. Texas A&M won that ball game. But all right,
I would say they came back from down 2 scores. They had all the momentum
in a game where they should have never been down.
Sure, but you were down. And you knew that in the second half coming into it.
When you allow Zach Calzada, who even was that like a week ago, to go down and tie the game in that drive like that in a dominant way and tie the game with 3 minutes to go, like, just the momentum shift. I mean, if you've ever played any sort of athletics, you understand how much momentum truly plays a huge role in the wins and losses in the game down the stretch. At that point, Alabama is on their heels, and it was done deal for me.
You're finally getting the ball back and the game is tied and you have the chance. I see what you're saying, but if anything, I'll say you should take more than 52 seconds off the clock. That I will stick to. You should have been able to take more than 52 seconds.
Yeah, I'll say this. Like, I think this was the most rattled I've seen Bryce Young in his 6 starts, and maybe understandably so, given the environment. It wasn't even the last drive of the game or the last 2 drives of the game for Alabama. It was more after he threw that interception in the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
The next 4 drives after that, punt, field goal when they stalled on a short field. They had gotten the ball off of the Calzada interception at the 40-yard line. They couldn't score a touchdown. They had a field goal, punt. I mean, we always talked about Mac Jones. When Mac threw an interception, I think most of the time he came back and had a touchdown the next drive. That was one of the big qualities that people always seem impressed with Mac about.
Sure.
And Bryce, I thought he got rattled, and I think the pressure was part of it. Like, he was getting hit, he was getting sacked, the crowd was getting into it. They were down by 14 points. That was a little bit different for me to watch a guy who's been really praised for being poised and all that. And I asked Saban about it on Monday, and he actually gave a pretty positive review of how Bryce handled that. But generally Saban does. He doesn't often, or doesn't really ever say anything too negative about Bryce. But he threw an interception last week too against Ole Miss. And even Saban said after that, like, he got a little frustrated and Saban had to talk to him. So this is 3 games in a row now with a pick for Bryce. I wouldn't say that they're all his fault. They're 100% his fault. But, there are some imperfect signs there is probably the best way I would put it.
Sure. All right. Well, moving forward, guys, Alabama now preparing for a Mississippi State team who did beat Texas A&M. Not only Mississippi State team that beat A&M, but is also coming off the bye week. Will Anderson, really the leader of the Tide defense, was asked about the post-game locker room and kind of what his message was to guys. Michael Casagrande of AL.com asked this question, and it just felt as though the response, the way he responded, was notable. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, Brian just mentioned your name as one of the guys who was a vocal leader speaking up after a while. I was like, was there a singular moment? Was there a team meeting? Is it the locker room? What was that moment like, and what did you say to the team?
I mean, what I've said to you guys, we have to do a better job. Football has to be the most important thing. That's the biggest thing when you come to Alabama. That's the standard. Football is the most important thing, and that's what I express to the team, and that's what it has to be, and it's going to be that.
So over like a 10-second pause there, while he kind of, I don't know if he was thinking about his response, thinking he didn't want to respond, and was frustrated because I think he had maybe been asked similar questions already, but you could tell that Will Anderson was very frustrated with the performance, did not meet the standard in which that he expects or that Alabama expects in Tuscaloosa. Rodak, what was your take on this when you saw it happen?
Yeah, I think he was almost waiting for a little bit of coaching on that question from their SID, Josh Maxson, standing outside. You can see him look over to him, and you can hear essentially Maxson tell him something, and then Anderson responded from there. I think it was a moment where he was just trying to figure out what to say or what he could say.
Okay.
and was kind of given the green light to say something. And look, I mean, I would say this too, like Will Anderson's been the most blunt, honest, upfront player that we've spoken to this year. And, sometimes it's a little bit robotic when you talk to these guys because it's the Alabama way and they're not going to tell you very much. And the responses are very much canned. I'd say Will Anderson breaks that mold. And I think Saban loves it. I mean, I think Saban loves what he brings. And he's talked about it before, his leadership qualities, his competitiveness, his intensity. I think those are all good things. I think fans want to hear what Will Anderson is saying, especially after this game. And I asked him a little bit later in that press conference, and it was a very short one. I think it was 3.5 minutes long. Essentially, you said the same things after the Florida game. You might remember he talked about playing up to the Alabama standard, having guys take football more importantly, watching more film together. And like, what happened to that? Did that message not get received? And that's when he said, it wasn't taken seriously, which again is a pretty blunt and honest moment that you're not always getting from these guys. And look, he's been here a year and a half. It's not like he's this 4th or 5th year guy, and he's clearly the leader. He's been a captain 3 out of the 6 games so far. When Brian Robinson was asked about leadership, he named Will Anderson right off the bat, along with Phil Mathis. And is that a good thing that you have such a young guy, theoretically? He's played a lot of football, but is that a good thing you have one of your younger guys being the biggest voice?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think what he's saying is certainly needed in that locker room. And I'm sure Nick Saban will like a few other guys to start talking the way that Anderson does.
Patrick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the context of it all, but he might have been a little stuck saying in his head, I've kind of already answered this question. There's only so many ways he can say that he's telling guys to take it seriously. There's also coming back from COVID, full stadiums, a lot more opportunities for kids. You don't know what all these kids are doing once they leave the locker room, once they leave the weight training room in the Mount Moore facility. So there's a lot of distractions. A lot of people, I see NILs. I don't think that's a big deal, but this is the changing of the guard when you lose 10 first-round draft picks. So I think we've all been in a pit before. This is maybe that moment where Will Anderson and some other players rise to the top and learn how to be a leader, learn something else about football other than how to play the position and how to play the game. And I know that Saban obviously has been going off about finishing and the whole Jaleel Billingsley and being mature and doing this and that. And as an Alabama fan, you're hoping this is the moment that all of these guys find their inner voice. If not, it could splinter a little bit more.
Yeah, no question. And one thing that Saban said after the game is that all of their goals, everything they want to accomplish, is still very much in reach. Yes, this loss is something that Bama fans want to forget, that Tide players want to forget, everyone in the locker room, everyone in Tuscaloosa wants to forget this loss. But I think Saban knows it's a potential opportunity to turn the tide here, so to speak, to take things more seriously, to maybe listen to the messages he's been preaching in the first 6 weeks of the season, because everything does still lie ahead for Alabama. When you look at best and worst case scenario moving forward, the West, absolutely, Bama still controls their own destiny in the West, which means they control their own destiny going into the potentially playing out for a national championship when it goes to the SEC title game into the playoffs. So with everything still lying ahead, Rodak, how motivating is this loss for the Tide? How much is there still this positive mentality of, okay, yeah, this was bad, we want to forget it, but there's still so much ahead?
We'll have to see how much it motivates them, I guess. I think the message there from Saban has always been, you almost forget what it's like to lose, because you think their last loss before this was the Iron Bowl in 2019, and half of their team probably is gone from that team. So half of their team just doesn't know what it's like to lose, and this is a reminder of what it's like to lose. And you heard Saban after the game talking about remembering the feeling and all that, but that's still just words. That still has to translate into what they do going forward. And the same thing that was true last week, I think, is still true, and it's hard to lose sight of it, that their schedule is still pretty favorable. When you talk about Mississippi State, they receive votes in the polls, but are they much of a threat to Alabama this week? Well, probably not. Tennessee has been looking better, but that game's at home. You have LSU, which is in a tailspin. You have New Mexico State, then you have Arkansas and Auburn. So very much so, I think they should win all 6 of those games. If they don't, then we're talking about worst case scenario. We're talking about 2010 type season. And then from there, it's just, can you beat Georgia? And if you don't beat Georgia, then you're not going to the playoff. And if you beat Georgia, then you're going to the playoffs. So it's still very simple. I don't think it's really changed. Like, I think the only thing that they've lost is the ability to go to the SEC championship game and lose and still make the playoff. I think they would have had to be undefeated going into that to do that. But I don't think the timeline or the scenarios of the season have changed all that much.
Yeah, I mean, the worst case scenario is you lose every game. That's obviously never going to happen. The worst case scenario that's kind of realistic is you lose that Iron Bowl, Texas A&M wins out, and they're representing the SEC West in the SEC championship because they'd have the tiebreaker with the 2 losses. I think the best case scenario is week in, week out, you work on these game plans, you figure it out. You don't even worry about Georgia anymore. You can't. You don't know what's going to happen in early December. And you don't exactly know what personnel you're going to have on the field because you're going to keep moving these parts. So the best case scenario is you get to the SEC championship and then you figure out against Georgia. And then you obviously go to the playoff and do what you do there as far as Alabama. But Alabama still has their destiny in front of them. They control it. They just have to figure out all these kinks that seem to be kind of stepping up right now.
Yeah, I think the margin of error is much smaller at this rate. And there is no opportunity for a slip up at any cost because you're not going to be a playoff team with 2 losses.
Although there is that one thing that still just intrigues me is that possibility if Alabama gets a second loss, but they still win the SEC West, which is very much doable. It would take A&M losing a game. It would take Auburn losing, but it's still very much doable. And then they go to the SEC championship game and they win, and you have a 2-loss.
And Georgia's a 1-loss.
winner. That would be. I mean, that would just throw the committee for a loop.
I think both get put in. I think I always love like talking these predictions, and I'm so glad I don't get paid to have to be somebody on the playoff committee because it's a horrible job. But in my opinion, you got to take the SEC champion, and then you got to take a 1-loss Georgia. They've been the most dominant team to this point. I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
Right. It's a fun one to think about just because you can picture America melting down with the idea.
Oh, complete meltdown.
Hey, I mean, I hate to put Auburn out like this, but like Georgia looked beatable, when they were playing Auburn. I mean, I don't think Auburn is anything.
For what, the first drive?
I thought there were a few moments where, especially when you're putting Alabama in place of Auburn, there are ways.
Just lost Texas A&M.
Yeah, I mean, I put this game as, I agree, it's just a trap game. I mean, you can't say that because each week is a different game plan, and especially give it 2 more months. Alabama's going to figure out something. I mean, again, the last thing with the Texas A&M game, trap game, there are all these momentum kind of breakers for them, and they lost it. This is where you fix that, but you do not worry about Georgia anymore. You worry about week to week.
All right, guys, speaking of week to week, this week it's Mississippi State, a team that is coming off a bye week. I always feel as though you never know because when teams have 2 weeks to prepare, a lot can change, a lot can look differently. Obviously, their last win was against the team that Alabama just fell to. It's easy to look at how someone did against somebody else and, does that really – I don't really think that holds a whole lot of clout when it comes to head-to-head matchups. It is rather intriguing that A&M is the last team that both of these teams played. Rodak, your thoughts on this state team and the Tide having to go to Starkville?
Yeah, the bye week didn't really help Ole Miss too much going to that Alabama game, but
true that.
It's just how it goes sometimes. It's hard to call it a trap game, this one, because it's like a trap game always seems to come after a big win. So they didn't have a big win last week. So it's not really – the mentality going in is not trap-ish. So, look, I mean, I think you look at how they played last year, Alabama against Mississippi State, and they shut them out. That offense, that Mike Leach air it out type of offense just didn't work. I don't think it's really working this year either. I mean, the stats aren't great. I think they're in the bottom third in terms of points scored in the SEC. I mean, they beat A&M, but that was when A&M was shooting itself in the foot offensively at quarterback.
Sure.
They had a couple chances late in that game to win, and they didn't. I don't know. I just have a hard time picturing Mississippi State beating them. So, I mean, I think I said something last week.
It's also worth noting our colleague Casagrande put it together that out of 8 in-season losses that Alabama had over the last 10 years, they won the following games, except that Sugar Bowl against Oklahoma. But they won every single other game after a big loss in season. So
yeah,
you can say what you want about streaks.
Right.
That one's going for them.
This is the game where you're angry, you're mad, you're trying to prove yourself again. And that's like Saban always talks about external versus internal motivation. And you needed internal motivation for a game like A&M where there wasn't that slight against you. Now there is that slight against you, and players want to go out and prove themselves. And
sure,
I think that helps with kind of how this team is constructed.
There's bulletin board material everywhere for that locker room, basically.
No question. No question. Well, that game kicks off at 6:00 on Saturday on ESPN. Number 5, Alabama. That is a weird thing to say.
I have one more insight. I was walking my dog right before the show, and my neighbors are big Mississippi State fans. And I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I think Mississippi State is going to win by -50." So if you want any inclination to what Bulldog fans think, there's one.
By what? They're going to win by
negative,
what?
They're going to win by -50. So he is not feeling good about his own team.
What does that mean? Oh, okay. Well, I'm not really sure.
Negative. -50. They're going to lose.
Well, that game kicks off at 6:00 Saturday on ESPN. Number 5, Alabama. The Tide dropped to 5th in the country after the loss to Texas A&M. I was a little surprised by that, but we will see. Again, the AP poll only matter. It doesn't really matter, quite frankly. After the playoff came in, it's something to talk about for the first 10 weeks of the season, and then we talk about the playoffs. So we'll see how things look in the next couple of weeks. But the Tide looking to bounce back after the loss to A&M. They'll take on the Bulldogs in Starkville on Saturday. Guys, thanks so much for joining BamaNews. For Patrick Greenfield and Mike Rodak, I'm Simone Eli. Have a great